My name is Ruth, and I'm 52 years old. As I sit here in my small basement office looking out at the quiet suburban street where I've lived for the past 20 years, I can't help but think about how invisible I've felt for most of my adult life. My daughter Sophia always saw me as the woman who organized neighborhood birthday parties and baby showers, never quite understanding that I had bigger dreams tucked away in my heart. She worked downtown for a major event planning company, handling what she called real events, while I stayed here in my comfortable little world. But sometimes the people we love most can't see our true potential until we show them what we're really made of. What happened 6 months ago changed everything between us, and I'm still processing how one decision transformed not just my career, but our entire relationship. Before I share what happened that changed everything between us, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. And if you've ever felt overlooked by someone you love, please hit that like button and subscribe for more stories about finding your voice when others can't hear it. Now, let me take you back to where it all started. I became a single mother when Sophia was just 5 years old. Her father decided that family life wasn't for him and walked away, leaving me to figure out how to support us both. Event planning wasn't my original career choice, but when you're desperate and have a gift for organizing, you make it work. I started small, really small. Birthday parties for neighbors, baby showers for church friends, anniversary celebrations for couples who wanted something special but couldn't afford the big companies downtown. My office was set up in the basement of our modest two-bedroom house in the suburbs. I had an old wooden desk that I'd bought at a garage sale painted white to make it look more professional. My laptop was ancient by today's standards, but it got the job done. The walls were lined with binders full of vendor contacts, budget spreadsheets, and photos from every event I'd ever organized. 23 years of small-scale celebrations, each one planned with the same attention to detail that the big companies used for corporate retreats. The neighborhood knew me as the woman who could make magic happen on a shoestring budget. Mrs. Patterson from down the street called me when she needed her granddaughter's sweet 16 to feel like a fairy tale. The Johnsons trusted me with their silver wedding anniversary when they wanted to recreate their original reception from 1978. I had a reputation for being thorough, reliable, and impossibly creative when it came to stretching a dollar. But I also had a secret that I'd never shared with anyone, not even Sophia. Late at night when the house was quiet and my work for the day was done, I would research corporate event planning. I studied the websites of major companies, analyzed their portfolios, read industry magazines that I subscribed to under a fake business name. I knew the difference between a cocktail reception and a networking mixer. I understood staging and lighting and the psychology of guest flow. I had notebooks full of ideas for large-scale events that I'd never had the courage to pursue. Sophia had grown into a confident, successful 28-year-old. She worked as a marketing manager for Sterling Events, one of the most prestigious event planning companies in the city. Her office was on the 40th floor of a glass tower downtown, and she regularly coordinated events for tech companies, law firms, and medical conferences that served hundreds of people. When she called me, which wasn't often enough, she would tell me about budget meetings and venue negotiations and client presentations that sounded like a foreign language. Our conversations had developed a pattern over the years. She would ask about my latest birthday party or baby shower with the tone of someone asking a child about their finger painting project. Sweet, but not quite taking it seriously. When I tried to share details about vendor negotiations or timeline management, she would cut me short with comments like, "That sounds lovely, Mom, but it's so different from what I do." The implication was always there, hovering between us like an unwelcome guest. My work was small, hers was important. My events were hobby level, hers were professional. I loved my daughter fiercely, but I had started to feel invisible in her eyes. She saw me as someone who had found her appropriate level and should be content there. A woman who was good at small things, who understood her limitations and stayed within them. When she visited, which was maybe once a month, she would glance around my basement office with a mixture of affection and pity, like she was proud of me for making the best of my circumstances, but also relieved that she had escaped them. The house itself reflected my small-scale life. It was comfortable but not impressive, decorated with furniture that had been practical choices rather than style statements. The living room held photos from dozens of events I'd organized, but they were all intimate gatherings. Sophia's high school graduation party, neighborhood block parties, retirement celebrations for people whose names wouldn't mean anything to anyone outside our zip code. What Sophia didn't know was that I had been preparing for something bigger my entire career. Every small event had been practice. Every budget constraint had taught me efficiency. Every demanding client had strengthened my problem-solving skills. Every vendor relationship had been carefully cultivated and maintained. I wasn't small-scale by limitation. I was small-scale by choice, but that choice had been motivated by fear rather than preference. That Tuesday morning started like any other. I was reviewing the timeline for a retirement party I was organizing for Mr. Hendricks, the mailman who had delivered to our neighborhood for 31 years. The guest list was 42 people, the budget was $800, and the venue was the community center that I could rent for $75 if I promised to clean up afterward. Then my email notification chimed and everything changed. The message was from Patterson Industries, a technology consulting firm with offices in 3 states and over 500 employees. They needed someone to coordinate their annual company retreat, a 3-day event that would include team-building activities, educational workshops, award ceremonies, and entertainment for their entire staff plus family members. The budget they mentioned made my head spin. It was more money than I typically earned in 6 months. My first instinct was to delete the email. Surely they had sent it to the wrong Ruth Williams. There had to be dozens of event planners with my name, and they obviously meant to contact one of the established companies downtown. But as I read through their requirements, something strange happened. I realized I knew how to do everything they were asking for. The scale was different, but the fundamentals were identical to what I'd been doing for over 2 decades. They wanted someone who could coordinate multiple vendors simultaneously. I had been doing that since Sophia was in elementary school. They needed someone who could manage complex timelines and keep hundreds of people engaged. I had been doing that at every block party and church social I'd organized. They wanted creativity, flexibility, and the ability to solve problems under pressure. Those were the skills I used every day. I spent the next 4 hours researching Patterson Industries. I learned about their company culture, their recent achievements, their management structure. I studied their previous events through social media posts and press releases. I made notes about their brand identity and the type of experience that would align with their corporate values. By the time I heard Sophia's key in the front door upstairs, I had filled 12 pages with ideas and preliminary budget calculations. She was stopping by to pick up some old college textbooks that she wanted to donate, something she'd been promising to do for months. "Mom, I'm just here for those books," she called down to me. "I can't stay long." But when she came down to my office to say hello, she stopped short when she saw my desk covered with printouts and notebooks, my laptop open to the Patterson Industries website. "What's all this?" she asked, picking up one of my research pages. "I got an interesting email today," I said, trying to keep my voice casual. "A company wants me to organize their corporate retreat." Sophia's eyebrows rose as she scanned my notes. "Patterson Industries, Mom, they're huge. They do major corporate consulting for Fortune 500 companies." "I know," I said, feeling a flutter of pride at the surprise in her voice. But then her expression shifted, and I recognized the look that always made my stomach tighten. It was the same face she made when I told her about wanting to take a computer class or mentioned that I might redecorate the living room. Polite interest mixed with gentle discouragement. "Mom, this says they need someone to coordinate an event for 500 people. That's like 10 times bigger than anything you've ever done." 12 times, actually, I said, immediately regretting the correction when I saw her face. "Right. Look, you're amazing at what you do. Mrs. Patterson still talks about how perfect you made her anniversary party. But this is really different. This is corporate-level planning. There are union regulations and liability issues and vendor contracts that are completely different from what you're used to." I felt heat rising in my cheeks. "I've been researching all morning. I understand what's involved." "Researching is different from actually doing it," she said gently, but her words stung like a slap. "Corporate events require a different kind of presence. You have to command respect from vendors who work with million-dollar budgets. You have to present to executives who are used to dealing with major firms. It's not personal." "Mom, it's just that you're great at small neighborhood parties, but this is different. This is corporate level." The way she said small neighborhood parties made 23 years of work sound like a hobby I'd picked up to keep myself busy. I tried to explain that event planning was event planning, that the principles scaled up, that I had more experience managing vendors and timelines than she realized. But with every word I spoke, her expression grew more concerned. "I just don't want you to get in over your head," she said finally. "There's nothing wrong with knowing your lane and staying in it." After she left with her box of books, I sat in my basement office staring at the Patterson Industries email. The cursor blinked in the reply box, waiting for me to either accept or decline their offer to submit a proposal. Sophia's words echoed in my head. Know your lane and stay in it. Small neighborhood parties, corporate level. But then I looked around at my office walls, at the photos from dozens of successful events, at the thank you cards from grateful clients, at the vendor contact lists I'd spent decades building. Maybe my lane was bigger than anyone realized. I started typing my response. The next morning, I submitted a 15-page proposal to Patterson Industries. It included detailed timelines, budget breakdowns, vendor recommendations, and contingency plans for weather, dietary restrictions, and accessibility needs. I had worked until 3 in the morning, double-checking every number, researching backup options for every recommendation. When my phone rang at 10:30, I almost didn't answer because I didn't recognize the number. "This is Ruth Williams," I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "Ms. Williams, this is David Chen, VP of Operations at Patterson Industries. I wanted to call personally to tell you how impressed we were with your proposal." My heart stopped. "Thank you, Mr. Chen. We've been planning this retreat for months, and frankly, the proposals we received from the major firms were either prohibitively expensive or surprisingly generic. Yours was the most comprehensive and creative proposal we received, and your budget allows us to add elements we thought were out of reach." I gripped the phone tighter. "I'm very interested in working with you. We'd like to move forward with your services. Can you come in Thursday for a planning meeting with our executive team?" After I hung up, I sat in stunned silence for nearly 10 minutes. Then I called Sophia. "You got it," she said when I finished explaining. Her voice was flat, which wasn't the reaction I'd expected. "I got it," I repeated. "David Chen said my proposal was the most comprehensive they received." "Mom, that's—" She paused, and I could hear office noise in the background. "That's really unexpected. Are you sure you're ready for this?" The doubt in her voice deflated my excitement like a pin in a balloon. "I think so. Yes, I'm ready. It's just that when you mess up a birthday party, you disappoint 12 people. When you mess up a corporate retreat, you damage relationships with major clients and potentially hurt the company's reputation." "I'm not going to mess up," I said, but even as I said it, I could hear uncertainty creeping into my voice. "Look, I'm not trying to be negative. I just think you should be realistic about what you're taking on. These aren't people who will forgive mistakes because they know you're doing your best. These are executives who expect perfection. So I'll give them perfection. Mom, it's not about trying harder, it's about presence, about commanding respect. You're not built for that spotlight. You've always been more comfortable being invisible, and that's okay. There's nothing wrong with being support staff instead of the star." The word invisible hit me like cold water. I tried to respond, but she was already moving on. "I have to go into a meeting, but please be careful with this. Don't promise them more than you can deliver." When she hung up, I looked at myself in the bathroom mirror upstairs. Was I really invisible? Had I been living my entire adult life as background support while other people took center stage? The woman looking back at me had gray streaking through her brown hair, laugh lines around her eyes, and clothes that prioritized comfort over style. I looked like someone who organized birthday parties, not someone who commanded respect from corporate executives. But then I thought about David Chen's voice when he called the genuine enthusiasm when he praised my proposal. He hadn't sounded like he was talking to someone invisible. That evening, I drove to the mall and bought my first business suit in over 20 years. The Patterson Industries offices occupied 3 floors of a downtown high-rise. When I stepped off the elevator Thursday morning wearing my new navy blue suit and carrying a leather portfolio I'd bought specifically for this meeting, I felt like an imposter in someone else's life. The conference room had floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, a polished table that could seat 20 people, and technology that made my basement setup look like something from the Stone Age. David Chen introduced me to the executive team, the CEO, the CFO, the Director of Human Resources, and 3 department heads. For the first 10 minutes, I felt completely out of place. These people wore expensive suits like uniforms, spoke in corporate buzzwords, and referenced budget numbers that made my head spin. But then, David asked me to walk them through my timeline, and something shifted. I opened my portfolio and pulled out the detailed schedule I'd created. As I explained how I would coordinate arrival logistics, manage multiple concurrent workshops, transition between activities, and handle meal service for 500 people, the room grew quiet. When I outlined my contingency plans for various scenarios, the CEO leaned forward in his chair. "Walk me through what happens if we get the severe weather that's been predicted for that weekend," he said. I had prepared for this question. I explained the indoor backup venues I'd researched, how the activities could be modified for smaller spaces, how the catering could be adjusted for indoor service, and how transportation would be managed if people couldn't walk between buildings. And if one of the main speakers cancels last minute. I had prepared for that too. I outlined my backup speaker list, how I would modify the schedule, and how we could use breakout sessions to maintain the educational value of the retreat. For 45 minutes, they threw scenarios at me, and I had answers for everyone. Not just answers, but comprehensive solutions that demonstrated I'd thought through every possible complication. When the meeting ended, the CEO shook my hand and said, "I have to admit, Ruth, when David told me he wanted to go with a local planner instead of one of the big firms, I was skeptical. But your level of preparation is extraordinary." As I rode the elevator down to the parking garage, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Professional pride. Not the quiet satisfaction of organizing a successful birthday party, but the electric confidence of knowing I belonged in that conference room. But my euphoria was short-lived. When I got home and checked my phone, there was a voicemail from Sophia. "Mom, I heard through office connections that you're doing the Patterson retreat. I want you to know that Sterling Events was one of the companies that bid on that project. We didn't get it because they said they were going with a local vendor, but I had no idea that vendor was you. Please call me back." When I returned her call, she answered on the first ring. "Mom, what were you thinking?" "What do you mean?" "Patterson Industries is a Sterling Events client for their quarterly marketing events. My colleagues are going to be at that retreat. My boss is going to be there representing our ongoing partnership with them." I felt my stomach drop. I didn't realize. "Everyone I work with will be there, Mom. These are serious people who expect a certain level of sophistication. They know what professional event planning looks like, and if this doesn't go well, it reflects on me too." "It's going to go well," I said, but my voice sounded small. "Is it because I've been thinking about this all day and I'm really worried?" "You've never managed vendor relationships at this scale. You've never coordinated transportation for hundreds of people. You've never dealt with the kind of liability issues that come with corporate events." "I can handle it." "Can you really?" "Because if something goes wrong, if the food is late or the equipment doesn't work or the schedule falls apart, these aren't people who will politely smile and tell you it was lovely anyway. These are people who will remember every mistake and make sure other people hear about it." Each word felt like a nail in my coffin. By the time she finished, I was sitting on my basement stairs wondering if I'd made a terrible mistake. "I just think," she said, her voice softer now, "maybe you should call them and explain that you've realized this project is bigger than you initially understood. Tell them you want to recommend a more established firm. I could give you some names." "Are you asking me to quit?" "I'm asking you to be realistic. Some people are meant for big things, some aren't. You're good at being background support. There's nothing wrong with that." When she hung up, I sat in the silence of my basement office surrounded by 23 years of small-scale success and wondered if she was right. Maybe I was invisible because that's where I belonged. But then I looked at the Patterson Industries contract on my desk, signed and official, and made a decision that would change everything. I threw myself into planning the Patterson retreat with an intensity that surprised even me. If I was going to prove that I belonged on that stage, I needed to be perfect. I spent the next 6 weeks working 14-hour days. I researched every vendor in the tri-state area, comparing prices and services until I found the perfect combination of quality and value. I visited potential venues personally, taking photos and measurements, testing acoustics and sightlines. I created backup plans for my backup plans. My basement office transformed into a war room. I covered one wall with a master timeline that broke down every hour of the 3-day retreat. Another wall held vendor contacts organized by service type and priority level. I bought a whiteboard and filled it with logistical notes that I updated daily. The theme they wanted was innovation through collaboration, and I designed activities that would reinforce that message throughout the weekend. Instead of generic team building exercises, I researched activities specific to their industry. Instead of standard conference room setups, I planned spaces that encouraged interaction and creative thinking. 3 weeks before the event, my biggest vendor called with devastating news. The catering company I'd contracted, which specialized in large-scale corporate events, had double booked their weekend and couldn't fulfill our contract. I spent the next 48 hours on the phone, calling every catering service within a 100-mile radius. The ones who were available were either too expensive or too inexperienced for an event of this magnitude. I was starting to panic when I remembered a conversation I'd had years earlier with Maria Santos, who ran a small catering business that primarily served weddings. Maria's operation was smaller than what I'd originally planned, but when I explained the situation, she was willing to partner with 2 other local caterers to handle the volume. It meant more coordination on my part, but it also meant better food at a lower cost, which would allow me to add elements to the retreat that hadn't been in the original budget. The week before the event, the weather forecast predicted severe thunderstorms for Saturday, right in the middle of our outdoor team building activities. I activated my backup plan, securing indoor venues and modifying activities for smaller spaces. When David Chen called to check on our contingency planning, I was able to walk him through exactly how we would handle the weather without missing a beat. 2 days before the retreat, Sophia called. "Mom, I keep hearing your name around the office. People are talking about the Patterson event." "Good things, I hope." "Curious things. Nobody can figure out how a local planner they've never heard of won such a major contract." My boss asked me if Ruth Williams was any relation to me. "What did you tell him?" "I told him you were my mother, and he seemed surprised. He said Sterling Events had bid on that project and been told they were going with someone more innovative and cost-effective." I felt a surge of pride. They said innovative. "Mom, please don't embarrass me in front of my colleagues. These people know what professional event planning looks like. Just try not to be too obvious about being out of your element." That night, I tried on the professional wardrobe I'd assembled over the past month. Looking at myself in the full-length mirror I'd installed in my bedroom, I saw someone different than the woman who had been organizing neighborhood parties in her basement. This woman looked like she belonged in corporate conference rooms. The morning of the retreat, I arrived at the venue 2 hours before the first guests were scheduled to check in. My setup team was already there, following the detailed instructions I'd provided. As I walked through the space, checking every detail, I felt something I'd never experienced before. I felt like the person in charge. The transformation was immediate and undeniable. From the moment the first guests began arriving Friday afternoon, I moved through the retreat like someone who had been born to command large-scale events. I was everywhere at once, solving problems before they became visible to guests, coordinating vendors with quiet efficiency, and maintaining the kind of calm professional presence that made everyone around me more confident. When the sound system developed feedback issues during the welcome presentation, I had the technical team resolve it in under 2 minutes. When the transportation from the airport was delayed, I had backup vehicles waiting. Sophia arrived with a group from Sterling Events just as I was greeting the CEO and his wife in the main lobby. I watched her face when she realized that the woman in the tailored business suit coordinating a team of professionals and speaking with corporate executives like peers was her mother. I didn't let her presence distract me. I had 500 guests to manage, and every detail of their experience was my responsibility. The first day's activities flowed seamlessly from one to the next. The breakout sessions I'd designed encouraged exactly the kind of cross-departmental collaboration that Patterson Industries wanted to foster. The networking lunch provided opportunities for employees who rarely interacted to discover shared projects and interests. The afternoon team-building exercises moved indoors due to weather, but adapted to work even better in the smaller space, generated the kind of energy and enthusiasm that made people excited to be part of their company. Throughout the day, I noticed Sophia watching me from a distance. During the cocktail reception Friday evening, she approached me while I was coordinating with the catering staff. "Mom, I hardly recognized you out there." "Just doing my job?" I said, checking my clipboard for the evening timeline. "No, it's more than that. The way you're handling this, the way people are responding to you, I've never seen you like this." Before I could respond, David Chen appeared at my elbow. Ruth, I wanted you to know that we've had overwhelmingly positive feedback on today's activities. The CEO specifically asked me to tell you that this is exactly what he hoped for when we decided to try a different approach to event planning. I'm so glad to hear that, I said. Tomorrow's schedule builds on today's momentum, so I think you'll be even more pleased. After David walked away, Sophia stared at me. Mom, he was talking to you like you're the expert. I am the expert, I said simply. Saturday's activities were flawless despite the weather. The indoor team building exercises I'd designed as backup turned out to be more engaging than the outdoor activities would have been. The educational workshops ran on schedule, the lunch service was seamless, and the afternoon awards ceremony had the perfect balance of recognition and entertainment. But the real moment came Saturday evening when David Chen introduced me to the entire group. Before dinner, I want to take a moment to recognize the person who made this weekend possible. Ruth Williams took our vision for innovation through collaboration and created an experience that exceeded every expectation. Ruth, would you come up and say a few words? As I walked to the podium, I caught sight of Sophia in the audience. She was sitting with her Sterling Events colleagues, and the expression on her face was one I'd never seen before. Not embarrassment or concern, but something that looked like wonder. Thank you, David. When Patterson Industries first contacted me about this retreat, I knew immediately that this was a company that understood something important about success. You know that innovation doesn't happen in isolation. The best ideas come from bringing together different perspectives, different experiences, different ways of solving problems. I looked out at the audience of 500 people, all listening intently to what I had to say. Over the past 2 days, I've watched departments that rarely interact discover they're working toward the same goals. I've seen longtime employees learn new approaches from recent hires. I've watched quiet team members find their voices and confident leaders learn to listen better. The room was completely silent. What you've accomplished here isn't just team building. You've created a template for how collaboration can drive innovation. And from what I've observed, that's going to make Patterson Industries even more successful than you already are. The applause was immediate and sustained. As I returned to my seat, people stopped me to shake hands, to compliment the weekend, to ask for my business card. But the moment that mattered most was when I saw Sophia making her way through the crowd toward me, her face shining with something I'd been hoping to see for years. Pride. The cleanup Sunday morning felt different from any event I'd managed before. Instead of feeling drained and relieved that it was over, I felt energized. The team of vendors and assistants who had worked with me over the weekend treated me with a respect I wasn't used to. They asked for my contact information, wanted to know about future projects, talked about how smoothly everything had run under my coordination. Sophia waited until most of the guests had departed before approaching me in the main lobby. Mom, I owe you an apology. I was directing the removal of staging equipment, but I stopped and gave her my full attention. I had no idea you could do this. I mean, I knew you were good at organizing parties, but this is something completely different. No, I said gently. This is the same thing I've always done, just on a larger scale. But you seemed so authoritative, confident. People listened to you like you were the expert they've been waiting to meet. Maybe because I am. She was quiet for a moment, watching as my team efficiently packed equipment and cleaned the venue. My colleagues spent the entire weekend asking how Patterson found you. They said this was the best corporate retreat they'd ever attended, and they couldn't understand how someone they'd never heard of could coordinate something this sophisticated. What did you tell them? I told them you were my mother, and that I'd obviously underestimated you my entire life. Over the next few days, my phone didn't stop ringing. Word about the Patterson retreat had spread through the corporate community faster than I'd expected. Companies that had never heard my name were calling to inquire about my services. A medical association wanted me to coordinate their annual conference. A law firm needed someone to manage their partner retreat. A technology startup was planning a product launch event for 800 people. The local business journal called to schedule an interview about the innovative local event planner who's shaking up the corporate scene. The Professional Event Planning Association, that I'd never felt qualified to join, sent me an invitation to speak at their monthly meeting. I realized I needed more than my basement office and my ancient laptop. I rented professional office space in a building downtown, just 3 blocks from where Sophia worked. I hired 2 part-time assistants and invested in equipment that would allow me to handle multiple large-scale events simultaneously. The woman who had felt invisible 6 months earlier was suddenly very visible indeed. But the most important change wasn't professional. It was the phone call I received from Sophia 3 weeks after the retreat. Mom, I've been thinking about what I said to you before the Patterson event, about staying in your lane and being background support. You were trying to protect me, I said. No, I was trying to protect myself. I was threatened by your potential because I thought it somehow diminished mine. I convinced myself that keeping you small was keeping you safe, but really I was just afraid that you might show me up. Sophia, let me finish. What you did at that retreat, the way you commanded respect from people who've worked with the biggest firms in the industry, it showed me something about myself that I didn't want to see. I've been working for a major company and managing other people's visions instead of creating my own. You took a risk and built something from nothing, and I've been too scared to try anything that might fail. You're successful. I'm employed. There's a difference. You're successful. 6 months later, I'm sitting in my downtown office looking out at the city skyline while my assistant coordinates details for next week's conference for 1,200 healthcare professionals. The walls are covered with photos from corporate retreats, product launches, and award ceremonies that I've organized for companies across the region. But my favorite photo is from last month's event, a small startup's first investor meeting that Sophia and I coordinated together. She had left Sterling Events to start her own marketing consultancy, and we'd partnered on a project that combined her marketing expertise with my event planning skills. In the photo, we're standing together behind the registration table, both wearing professional suits, both confident in our abilities, both finally seeing each other clearly. The journey from my basement office to this downtown suite wasn't just about changing venues. It was about changing how I saw myself and how I allowed others to see me. For 23 years, I had been practicing for something bigger without realizing it. Every small event had been preparation for the moment when I would finally step into the spotlight I'd been avoiding. Sophia and I have rebuilt our relationship on a foundation of mutual respect instead of assumed limitations. She comes to my office now instead of expecting me to stay in my basement. We collaborate on projects instead of working in separate worlds. She asks for my advice instead of giving me hers. But perhaps most importantly, I've started mentoring other women who feel invisible in their own lives. Last month, I spoke at a workshop for women entrepreneurs about the difference between choosing to be background support and being relegated there by others' expectations. Your worth isn't determined by who sees you, I told them, but by how clearly you see yourself. The moment I stopped waiting for permission to shine, I realized I had always been bright enough. I just needed to turn on my own light. The woman who organized birthday parties in her basement and the woman who commands corporate retreats downtown are the same person. The difference isn't in capability or experience or even confidence. The difference is in refusing to accept other people's definitions of what I'm capable of achieving. Sometimes the people closest to us see our limitations more clearly than our potential, but that's their limitation, not ours. When Sophia called me invisible, she wasn't describing me. She was describing her own inability to see who I really was. Now, when I look in the mirror, I see someone who took up space, demanded respect, and proved that invisible was never who I was. It was just who I allowed myself to be. Have you ever felt invisible in your own life, overlooked by people who should see your potential? Have you ever been told to stay in your lane when you knew you were capable of so much more? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. And if this story inspired you to step into your own spotlight, please hit that like button and share it with someone who needs to hear that they're not invisible either. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories about finding your voice when the world tries to silence it. Thank you for joining me today, and remember that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is refuse to stay small just because it makes other people comfortable. Your light was meant to shine, so don't let anyone convince you to dim it.